Welcome back to another tutorial. Now this week, we're going to be diving into Lightroom Classic, and we're going to do a full guide to all the mask options that are available to you. If you're new to Lightroom, if you've dabbled a bit already, this is where we're going to cover everything you need to know about masks, and really everything that's going to get you geared towards taking your editing to another level. Masks is where you can really make your edit shine. You can shape the light, you can really edit things a little bit more precisely and get the exact end result that you're looking for. And there are so many different ways to do that now in Lightroom. Some of them are exceptionally easy as well. There's a lot of tools to make your life just a lot easier. So we're going to dive into that. But first, let's roll that intro. It's Tutorial Tuesday. Welcome back to Tutorial Tuesday, where each and every Tuesday we bring you a brand new, fresh photography tutorial. Let's dive into Lightroom Classic and start checking out the masks. Okay, let's start by looking at this photo where we can actually cover a few of the different mask options that are available to us. So we're going to break this into a couple of different sections. The first section we're going to look at are the masks that Lightroom are going to help us to draw. We've kind of got two options here with masks. We can either draw them ourselves in a few different ways, which we'll take a look at, and then we can get Lightroom to actually draw some of these masks for us using some of the kind of built-in tools. So let's look at some of those to begin with. First up, we're going to come out to the masking panel here on the right, and we're going to look at the different options here. So when you actually add a mask to begin with, it looks a little bit like this, whereas every subsequent mask that you add looks slightly different. So we'll take a look at that in a second. So the first one we're going to look at is the subject mask. When we click this, Lightroom is going to detect the subject in the photo and mask it for us. And it generally does a very good job. So for example, right now, Nala, my dog there, is masked. You can see she's now red because that's where the mask is. We can actually press O to turn off showing the mask. We can press O again on the keyboard to see that mask. We've got mask 1, subject 1, and that is Nala. And that means that now when we apply different effects to this, it is just applying it to that mask. Now this is fantastic for making your subject pop a little bit. Like in a situation like this, I just want to brighten her up without brightening the rest of the photo, right? So if I was to actually, let's actually turn that mask off and go back to editing. If I wanted to brighten her up, but I just do it on the global sliders, it's obviously going to brighten the entire photo, which is not ideal. So Control Z to undo that. And then we can come back here to mask 1, turn that back on. She is now brightened up. That looks a lot better immediately. And like I say, super useful tool, especially for things like portraits, but really that can be used for all kinds of different things. Similarly, we can go create new mask, and now you can see it actually appears in a slightly different way. Select background is essentially going to do the opposite. So if I click that, Lightroom is going to actually find the subject again and then mask out everything else. So in this case, now everything is masked except for Nala. So I could actually do the opposite if I wanted to. I could darken the background. Now I think in this situation, it starts to look a little bit unrealistic, but it can be a really useful tool for, maybe how you want to edit the photo. For example, I could bring the highlights down, but only on the background, so it's not applying to Nala there. Next up, let's go create new mask. This time we're going to select the sky. Now again, this can be really handy because sometimes the sky, it can be a little bit problematic. We've got some highlights to deal with. This time, obviously just the sky is selected there, and you can see in some situations we've got things like Nala's tail is actually just a little bit selected there. There are ways we can sort that. So for example, on any mask, we can come up here, we've got add, or we've got subtract. In this case, let's go subtract, and we're going to use the brush to actually subtract areas from the mask. So in this case, I'm just using the mouse scroll wheel to make the brush bigger and smaller, and I'm just going to brush over her tail a little bit like that, just to remove it from the mask. If I press O, you can see now we can't see the mask. With O, again, we can see all the red is where that mask is. And what I can do is I could do something like bring the contrast of the sky up a bit. I could maybe bring the exposure down if I wanted to darken that sky a touch, or I could come down and just bring the dehaze up a touch as well. Let's just bring that exposure back up, maybe the contrast down a little bit, something like that. I could warm just the sky to do something like that. It's a really useful tool. The sky mask is one that I use a lot because it's just very, very handy for all kinds of different things. I'll go for something like that. That looks pretty good. Another way we can select things in the scene is via the object mask. This is when subject's not doing the job, or maybe it doesn't actually apply in this situation. Background doesn't work, sky doesn't work. Let's go create new mask. Let's go select object. Now, Lightroom then gives us a brush tool again to work with. And what we're going to do is just paint over the object we want to select. So in this case, I want to select this building. I'm going to do a rough outline. So just around the edges here, like so. We're going to get all of this all around the edge here. Don't have to be super precise because Lightroom will kind of get what I'm going for. And then I'm just going to sort of color in the inside a little bit as well. So something like that. Now, Lightroom's going to detect the object in the scene, and you can see it's done actually a pretty good job there of working out what I'm looking for, including masking out these little areas down here, which is great. I can add this little area here as well, and I can actually do that super easy with a brush tool, just by doing something like that. And now I can do things like just increase the exposure of the building, the contrast of the building if I wanted to, maybe bring the whites levels up just to really make it pop against that sky, maybe bring the blacks down a little bit, add some more contrast, but I'm just affecting that object. So that's a super easy way of selecting something in the scene when maybe subject doesn't apply, or maybe, you know, you want something in the background, but it's not the entire background. It's a really good way of, it helps you select those things without having to be so precise with the brush tool. Now, when it comes to people and portraits in general, there are some really useful tools available to help you mask out certain parts of a portrait. So something like this, for example, we could absolutely go over to the masking panel and we could do select subject, right? And Lightroom is going to find our subject there. Perfect. We can actually just bring the exposure up a tiny bit if we wanted to make her pop a little bit more against that background. But we can also come in and go create new mask and come down to select people. Now, what Lightroom's going to do then is actually work out how many people are in the scene and then give you different options to select each individual person. In this case, there's only one, so we're going to click person one. But now we can mask out all kinds of different parts of our model here. So for example, we could go facial skin, we could go body skin, we could go things like eye sclera, iris and pupil. If we want to make the eyes pop a little bit more, we can actually do that. So let's go ahead and do facial skin and body skin, for example, right? And let's go ahead and do eye sclera and iris and pupil. Let's do that. And let's do something like hair as well. Now you can see we've got another tick box here to create 5 separate masks. So we can either do this as one mask or 5 separate masks. Let's create masks as 5 separate. So first up now, we've got mask 2. This is the hair. So I could, for example, I could warm up the hair a little bit if I wanted to. I could come down and add some clarity to the hair, something like that, just to make it pop a little bit more. I could come over to mask 3. This is iris and pupil. I could maybe just bring the exposure up a touch, maybe the saturation, just make those kind of the color in the eyes pop a little bit more. Mask 4, eye sclera. Again, maybe I want to bring the whites up just a touch. Now, mask 5, body skin. Maybe I want to come down and just soften that a little bit. I'm going to bring the clarity down, the texture down a little bit. Mask 6, same sort of thing, facial skin. I can bring the clarity down, the texture down a bit, not too much, but it just softens that skin up. And very quickly, what we've done there is made quite a big difference to our model and done a lot of the kind of touch-up work that we might do with regards to a portrait. But Lightroom has really helped us very quickly mask out the areas we want to affect very accurately and very quickly. For portraits, this is absolutely fantastic. And actually, I'll be honest with you, it just saves so much time. It means I can get so many more photos done in the same amount of time it used to take because I'm not having to manually add all this stuff in myself. Now, when it comes to landscape photos, we can do a very similar kind of thing that we can do with those portraits. We can come up here to the masking panel and we can go ahead and actually look at landscape. So rather than selecting people, we can select landscape, and Lightroom's going to do the same thing. It's going to analyze the landscape and then give us a few different options for what we can mask out. So for example, in this situation, we've got sky, mountains, water, and natural ground. But depending on what's actually in the landscape, Lightroom will give us lots of different options. If it's more of a forested landscape, it'll give us trees and things like that. Again, water's here, so we've got water. I don't use this as much, and we'll come on to why in a moment, because I suppose for landscapes, I like to build the masks myself a little bit more. I don't find these quite as useful, but it can be a really useful thing. For example, the water, let's create a mask on that. That's a really, really handy thing. If I wanted to bring the exposure up of that, the contrast maybe, and then actually maybe even make it a little cooler. Or I could warm it up if I wanted to, but I could just affect the water by itself. And it's such a quick way of masking that out. And I have in the past actually gone to the lengths of trying to brush across just the water and not, get, in this case, the cliffs and that sort of thing, and the lighthouse. This is so much easier. If I press O, you can see it's such a precise mask on that water, even down to these little rock pools here. Absolutely incredible. Right, let's come back to this photo and we're going to look at some of the masks that you kind of can build yourself. Now, some of these are some of my absolute favorite. I use them all the time, especially linear gradient, which we're going to look at first. So if we come up to create new mask, linear gradient, let's bring this down from the top, shall we? So this is going to give us a kind of graduated effect. So we could do something like this, and I could darken, in this case, the top part of the sky. Now, I love doing this kind of thing. I think it helps shape the light. Let's do another linear gradient. I could do something like this, coming up from the bottom. Again, it's nicely feathered, and the more I kind of pull it around, the more I can actually affect that feathering and how kind of light or heavy it is in the photo. I could darken this foreground. That just pushes our viewer's eye to our subject here. I could create another one. I could bring in a linear gradient from the side. Sometimes I like to do this to kind of accentuate the light from one side. So in this case, I'm going to do that. I'm going to bring the exposure up, maybe warm it up a little bit, and actually bring the dehaze down to create the feeling of sort of sunlight there, which I actually really like as well. Now, we can actually add that in with something like a radial gradient. So in this case, here we go. We've got a radial gradient. This allows us to do a similar sort of thing. So a nice feathered radial gradient, so basically a circle, which we can completely change the shape of. We can make it more of an oval. We can make it big, small, whatever we want. We can invert it up here by clicking invert just here to actually do the opposite, have the mask on the outside of the circle. And we can affect that feather as well by just using this slider here. I like to have a nice feathered option. So for example, in this situation, I'm going to brighten the center of this image, but I might go in and do another radial gradient, something like this. I might invert that and then actually darken the edges of the photo. A little bit of a vignette there. And so that can be a really, really powerful way of being able to edit your photos. I love shaping the light like that. We could go in and do another radial gradient from the background, something like up here. And actually we could just warm that part of the sky up where it looks like the sun is more over on that side. And now we get this very nice kind of more warm to cool feel from right to left. A nice bit of light in the photo. I think it looks really nice. Obviously, we've also got the brush as well, which allows us very simply to be able to just brush onto our image. Now you can see here, I've got something called auto mask turned on. That means that it's really helping me stay within the line. So in this situation, it's kind of tried to work out there's a little bit of a line here between the sand and the sea. So it's let me just brush onto that. If I was to brush over Nala here, it's going to help me, again, stay within the lines, which is really useful. If I press Ctrl Z to undo that, if I turn that off, I go create a new mask, brush, and turn auto mask off. Now I'm free to just brush over whatever I want, and Lightroom's not going to help me in any way. So that's a really useful way of being able to make your own mask completely from scratch like that, and actually brush on exactly where you want that to be. That can be really useful. For example, in this case, I might go for a brush, and I might just want to do something like, I can bring this flow down. That's going to allow me to kind of build up the mask as I paint it on. So in this case, I'm going to just brush underneath Nala like this, just on the ground, something like that. And I'm just going to bring the exposure down. I just want to accentuate the shadow underneath her, something like that. That could be a really useful way of doing that. And the brush tool is probably one of the best tools for that particular job. Now, finally, let's look at two of the masks that are able to help you kind of mask certain areas, but you're still kind of fully in control of exactly what you're trying to do there. Let's go ahead and add a new mask to this photo, and let's go to these range options. We've got two range options, color and luminance. Color allows us to select a color in the scene. So in this case, let's go for the blue in the sky. And what we'll do is actually draw a square by clicking and holding and select that blue. And what that's going to do is select all of that color within the scene. You can see it's maybe done more than I'd like there. So I can use this refine slider here to actually refine that down, and there we go. That's pretty good. And what I could do then is maybe bring the exposure down, the contrast up, maybe I want to bring the black level down of that, the saturation down a little bit perhaps, and then come down and just up the dehaze and just make that blue pop a little bit more. Now, similarly, if we come down to luminance range, that allows us to select a certain brightness in the photo. In this photo, everything is actually a pretty similar brightness, but we could select a certain brightness in the photo and only mask that out. Now, where this can get really interesting and really cool actually is when you start intersecting these masks with each other. This is where you are applying one mask, but telling Lightroom you only want this mask to be applied if it actually also overlaps with another mask. Let's take a look at exactly what I mean here. So in this situation, we're going to create a linear gradient. So something like this for the sky, but you can see it also overlaps Nala here. So what we're going to do is right click on that mask, go intersect mask with, and in this case, we're going to click select sky. We're telling Lightroom that we only want this linear gradient to be applied where it also overlaps with where a sky mask would be applied. So if I click that, you'll now see that it now appears only behind Nala. It doesn't go onto the actual ocean here either. And I can still move it around. If I actually want to, I can still change the linear gradient, but it is only affecting the actual sky. And now, when I darken that in this situation, do something like this, or maybe warm this up a little bit as well, or even cool it down, I'm getting only that effect on the sky itself. Now, this can be really useful. I use this all the time. If you look at any of our editing videos on this channel, and there's loads of tutorials about that, I'm using intersect mask constantly. Landscapes, portraits. Let's take a look at a portrait actually to show you exactly what I mean. So for example, in this situation, we might want to shape some of the light here. Let's go ahead and create a new mask. Let's go linear gradient and let's darken this side. Now we can do that just like this, and actually that's completely fine. But maybe we just want to get that background. We don't want to get our subject. There's a couple of different ways we could do that. We could come in and right click, intersect mask with, select background. Now that's only going to affect behind our subject there. And actually, we might want to darken some of her as well. So let's go ahead and do another linear gradient, bring that in, something like this, but just not quite as severe. And we're going to darken that exposure a little bit as well. Now, in this situation, that might be fine. But what we can do is right-click, intersect mask with, select subject. Now we've got two different masks, one that's darkening the background and one that's darkening our subject. And we can individually affect exactly how much they're going to be doing to the photo. Similarly, we might want to brighten over the left. Now let's go ahead and do a radial gradient for this one. Let's do something like this, and let's just bring that in. And what I'm going to do is just brighten, bring that exposure up a touch, and then come down and actually bring the dehaze down a little bit. Let's do something like that. That looks really nice, right? And that's fine as is, but we might want to go ahead and just brighten that side of our model's face there. So I could go ahead and do something like this and intersect mask with, select subject. Now we've got this radial gradient that is only affecting our subject. And if I was to just bring the dehaze down a touch or the exposure up, we've brightened that side of her face. Now that might be a little bit too bright. Maybe we bring the overall exposure of the photo down just a touch to kind of compensate. Look how lovely that is. Now I use intersect mask all the time for all kinds of different things. And absolutely, if you're interested in learning more about Lightroom Classic, then we have so many videos, I mean dozens of videos at this point about Lightroom Classic, and so many of them feature intersecting masks. If you really are just getting started with Lightroom and this has all felt a bit overwhelming, we've also got a great getting started guide, so a beginner's guide to Lightroom Classic, so you can really get to grips with the program itself before you start diving into masks. Otherwise, absolutely the best way to just get better at this stuff is just to do it, just to dive in, start playing around, using these sliders, using these masks, and just really get a feel for it. As soon as you start doing that a little bit, it'll all start to click into place. It'll all make sense. And it is such a fantastic program to be editing your photos. And that's really where you can bring everything to life, bring it all together and get those fantastic final results. Now, if you enjoyed that video, make sure to subscribe because there's new content all the time, new tutorials every single week. Let me know if there's something specific you would like to see as well, because there's always room for some great suggestions. You guys have some lovely suggestions as well. Of course, there's a full list of all the kit we use for all these photos, these videos, everything down in the description as well. All that's left for me to say, though, is I will see you in the next video. Until then, though, as always, thanks for watching.